Tell him I don't need his invitation. This isn't who I am.
Understanding the context. 1961 Hollywood and the Kennedy era. Before we tell you why Dean Martin did something that shocked Hollywood, we need to understand what was happening in America in January 1961. John F. Kennedy had just won the presidency. He was young, handsome, and represented a new era in American politics. He was bringing Hollywood and Washington, D.C. together like never before. Kennedy loved movies, loved celebrities, and loved being around the glamorous world of entertainment. And Hollywood loved him back. Kennedy's inauguration was going to be the biggest celebrity event in American history. The most famous actors, singers, and entertainers in the world were being invited to perform. Frank Sinatra, the most famous singer in America, was organizing the entire entertainment program. It was the event of the century. Dean Martin was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. His name was right there at the top with Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Peter Lawford. When you got an invitation to perform at the president's inauguration, you didn't say no. You didn't even think about saying no. It was the greatest honor of your career. But Dean Martin said no. And the reason why would change how the entire world saw him. The invitation that shocked Hollywood in December 1960, Dean Martin received a phone call. It was Frank Sinatra. Frank was calling with the most incredible invitation of the decade. Dean was being asked to perform at President Kennedy's inauguration on January 20th, 1961. This wasn't just any performance. This was the inauguration of the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, the most glamorous moment in recent American history. Every major star wanted to be there. But Dean Martin said something that made Frank Sinatra go silent on the other end of the phone. Dean said, "No, I can't do it." Frank was shocked. Other people in Hollywood were shocked. Nobody turned down the President of the United States. Nobody turned down Frank Sinatra when he was organizing the greatest entertainment event in American history. But Dean Martin had a reason so powerful that it would make people rethink everything they thought they knew about him. A reason that would prove he was more than just a funny guy who made people laugh. Why this hook works, the audience is immediately confused and curious. Dean Martin turned down the biggest opportunity in Hollywood history? Why would he do that? That doesn't make sense. And that makes people want to know more. Who was Dean Martin? Dino Paul Crocetti was born in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, to an Italian immigrant father. His early life was hard. His father worked as a barber. The family didn't have much money. But Dino had a gift. He could sing. He could make people laugh. He had charm that could light up a room. He became Dean Martin, one of the most famous entertainers in the world. By 1960, he had made dozens of movies, becoming a major film star. Won millions of fans with his smooth voice and charming personality. Built a television career that was enormously successful. Created comedy partnerships that were legendary. Become wealthy beyond his wildest childhood dreams. Dean Martin was the guy who could do it all. He could sing a song that made women cry. He could deliver a joke that made men laugh until their sides hurt. He could act in serious dramas and in silly comedies. He was the definition of the complete entertainer. But there was something about Dean Martin that the public didn't fully understand. There was depth beneath the charm. Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. Frank Sinatra was the king of Hollywood in 1960. He was the most famous singer in the world. And around Frank, there was a group of friends called the Rat Pack: Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and a few others. These men were close friends. They hung out together. They made movies together. They performed together. But there were tensions in this group that the public didn't understand. For example, Sammy Davis Jr. was black. And in 1960, America was a segregated country. There were laws against integration. There were places where Sammy couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't perform, even though he was one of the most talented performers in the world. Frank Sinatra had stood by Sammy Davis Jr. despite the social pressure. Despite the threats, Frank had refused to perform in places that wouldn't let Sammy perform with him. Frank had befriended Sammy publicly, which was considered controversial in 1960. The friendship between these men, Frank, Dean, Sammy, and Peter, was actually a statement against racism. Whether they meant it that way or not, they were integrated before integration was legal. The weight of expectation. Dean Martin in December 1960 was a man living his dream. He was rich. He was famous. He could do anything he wanted. He could perform anywhere. He could make more money in one night than his father had made in a year. But he was also a man carrying something heavier than people realized. His son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., was born in 1942. By 1960, Dean Paul was 18 years old. He was a good kid. He was kind. He was decent. But he was also suffering from something that the public didn't know about. A serious personal problem that was growing worse. Dean Martin loved his son. He loved him with the fierce love that every father has for his child. And he was watching his son struggle with something that no parent should have to watch their child struggle with. The family crisis in late 1960. Dean Martin was facing a family emergency. It wasn't something he could talk about publicly. This was private. This was personal. This was the kind of thing that would be discussed only behind closed doors. Only with family, only with the people closest to him. His son needed him. Not just money. Not just advice. His son needed his father to be present. His son needed to know that his father was there for him, no matter what. And Dean Martin was the kind of man who understood what that meant. Why this section matters now the audience understands that Dean Martin wasn't just an entertainer. He was a father. He was a man facing a personal crisis. He was a man who had to choose between the biggest opportunity of his career and his family. The phone call. Frank Sinatra called Dean Martin in the second week of December 1960. "Dean," Frank said, "you're going to perform at the inauguration. It's already arranged. It's Kennedy. It's the president. It's going to be the biggest thing we've ever done." Dean Martin listened. He could picture it in his mind. The Washington, D.C. scene. The grandeur. The history. The opportunity to perform for the President of the United States in front of millions of people watching on television. It was the kind of opportunity that entertainers dreamed about. But Dean Martin had something weighing on his heart that Frank didn't understand. Or maybe Frank understood but was hoping Dean would put it aside. "Frank," Dean said quietly, "I can't do it." "What do you mean you can't do it?" Frank's voice rose. Frank wasn't used to being told no. Frank was used to people jumping when he said jump. "Frank, my son needs me," Dean said. "I can't be in Washington, D.C. on January 20th. I need to be here. My family needs me to be here." There was silence on the other end of the phone. The pressure campaign. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. This was Frank Sinatra. This was the most powerful man in Hollywood entertainment. When Frank Sinatra wanted something, he usually got it. Frank called back. He said, "Dean, think about what you're doing. This is the president. This is history." Dean said, "I know, Frank. I know what it is. But I have to put my family first." Other people called too. People from the Kennedy camp. People who were organizing the inauguration. They couldn't believe that Dean Martin was turning them down. But Dean Martin stood firm. He wasn't going to budge. The Hollywood gossip machine started turning. Rumors spread through the studios and the nightclubs. Dean Martin turned down the president's inauguration? People couldn't believe it. Why would he do that? What was the reason? Some people whispered that Dean was sick. Maybe he had cancer? Maybe he was dying? Some people said that Dean was having money problems. Maybe he couldn't afford to go? Some people said that Dean was being difficult or arrogant. Maybe he thought he was too important to perform at the inauguration? Nobody guessed the truth. The loneliness of the decision, what nobody understood in December 1960, was how lonely this decision was. Dean Martin was giving up the greatest opportunity of his career. He was giving up the chance to perform for the President of the United States. He was giving up the chance to be part of history. He was giving up the spotlight and the glory and the stories he could tell for the rest of his life. And he was doing it quietly. He wasn't making a big announcement. He wasn't explaining his reasons. He was just saying no and dealing with the disappointed looks and the questions. The Rat Pack was going to Washington, D.C. Frank Sinatra was going to be there. Sammy Davis Jr. was going to be there. Peter Lawford was going to be there. But Dean Martin was going to stay home. He was going to stay home because his son needed him. The personal agony as January 20th, 1961 approached. Dean Martin watched the news coverage. He saw the announcements about the entertainment lineup. He saw the big stars getting ready. He saw Frank Sinatra becoming even more famous because he was the one organizing the greatest entertainment event in American history. And he stayed home with his son. On January 20th, 1961, while the inauguration was happening in Washington, D.C., Dean Martin was in Los Angeles. He wasn't on television. His name wasn't in the history books. Nobody was talking about Dean Martin that day because Dean Martin had removed himself from the story. But he was where he needed to be. The weight of keeping the secret. What made this even harder was that Dean Martin couldn't explain why he had done it. He couldn't tell the world about his son's personal struggles. That would be betraying his son's privacy. It would be putting his son's business on blast for the whole world to see. So he just had to accept that people thought he was crazy for turning down the president. He had to accept the confused looks. He had to accept the criticism. He had to accept that people didn't understand. Also that his son would know that his father loved him more than fame, more than glory, more than history. Years passed. For years, Dean Martin didn't explain his decision. He just moved on with his career. He made more movies. He became more famous. He made more money. He built an empire of entertainment. But the question never really went away. Why did Dean Martin turn down the president's inauguration? In interviews, when people would ask him about it, Dean Martin would deflect. He would make a joke. He would change the subject. He didn't want to talk about it. But then something changed. The moment of understanding. Slowly, over the years, the word got out. It wasn't Dean Martin who told people. It was other people in his life. Close friends. Family members. People who understood what he had sacrificed. The truth came out. Dean Martin had turned down the president's inauguration to be there for his son. This wasn't about being sick. It wasn't about money problems. It wasn't about being arrogant. It was about love. It was about a father choosing his son over the greatest opportunity of his career. And when people understood this, when they really understood what he had done, everything changed. The shift in perception. Suddenly, Dean Martin wasn't just the funny guy who made people laugh. He was the guy who proved that he had real values. He was the guy who showed that family came first. He was the guy who was willing to sacrifice everything for the people he loved. This was especially powerful because it came from someone who was famous for partying, for joking, for being the life of the party. Nobody expected Dean Martin to be the guy who put his family first. But that's exactly what he was. Hollywood started looking at him differently. Not just as an entertainer, but as a man. A real man. A man with principles. A man who understood what mattered. Other fathers in America heard this story, and it touched something deep inside them. They understood what Dean Martin had done because they had faced similar choices. They had all had moments where they had to choose between their career and their family. Most of them had chosen career because that's what society expected. But Dean Martin had chosen family. And he had done it without making a big deal about it. He had done it quietly, privately, and with dignity. The changing legacy. As Dean Martin got older, this story became part of his legacy. It wasn't the most famous story about him. It wasn't the story that got the most press. But it was the story that meant the most to people who really understood him. When Dean Martin died in 1995, newspapers didn't just write about his movies or his singing career. They wrote about the time he turned down the president's inauguration to be there for his son. They wrote about his character. They wrote about what kind of man he really was. And it was a different picture than a lot of people had expected. The impact on culture. This story changed how people thought about success. It changed how people thought about what it meant to be a successful man. Success wasn't just about being famous or making money or performing for the President of the United States. Success was about your priorities. Success was about having the strength to say no to something amazing so that you could say yes to something more important. Success was about understanding that the people you love are more valuable than any opportunity, no matter how big. Young entertainers who heard this story started thinking about their own families differently. Young fathers who heard this story started thinking about their own choices differently. And young people in general started understanding that there was more to being successful than just achieving professional milestones. What Dean Martin really taught us. The story of Dean Martin turning down JFK's inauguration is ultimately a story about love. It's a story about what love really means when it has to compete with the biggest opportunity of your life. Love isn't just about the big gestures. Love isn't just about saying, "I love you." Real love is about sacrifice. Real love is about being there. Real love is about choosing the person you love over yourself, over your career, over your dreams. This is especially powerful coming from Dean Martin because he was known for being fun, for being entertaining, for making people laugh. People didn't expect depth from him. People didn't expect him to be serious. People didn't expect him to have deep values and principles. But that's what made his choice so meaningful. It showed that beneath the charm, beneath the jokes, beneath the entertainment, there was a real man with real values. The lesson about priorities. In 1961, American society was telling people that success meant climbing the ladder. Success meant getting bigger opportunities. Success meant performing for the president. Success meant being on television. Success meant being part of history. Dean Martin ignored all of that. He said, "No, my son matters more. My family matters more. Being there for my son matters more than any of this." And it took real strength to do that. It took real conviction. It took real love. In 2025, we need this lesson more than ever. In a world of social media and career advancement and constant pressure to achieve more and more, we need to remember Dean Martin's choice. We need to remember that the best thing you can do with your life isn't always the biggest thing. Sometimes the best thing is the quietest thing. Sometimes the best thing is being there for someone you love. The lesson about character. Dean Martin's character showed in how he made this decision. He didn't announce it. He didn't make it about himself. He didn't write a press release saying, "I'm turning down the president to focus on family values." He just quietly said no. He protected his son's privacy. He handled it with dignity. He didn't try to make himself look good because of his sacrifice. That's real character. Real character is doing the right thing when nobody is watching. Real character is making a sacrifice and not expecting credit for it. The lesson about love. At the heart of this story is a simple truth. Love is more powerful than ambition. Dean Martin could have had both. He could have performed at the inauguration and then come home to his son. But his son didn't need him a few hours a week. His son needed him to be all in. His son needed his father to show him that he mattered more than anything else. That's what love looks like. Love looks like sacrifice. Love looks like being there. Love looks like putting someone else's needs above your own needs. The question for you. This story asks each of us a question. What are we willing to sacrifice for the people we love? It's easy to say that family comes first when you're not facing a real choice. But what happens when you're facing the opportunity of a lifetime? What happens when you're facing a choice between your career and your family? Are you Dean Martin? Or are you someone else? Dean Martin showed us what being Dean Martin meant. It meant choosing your son even when the whole world was telling you to choose yourself. It meant being willing to be misunderstood. It meant being willing to sacrifice glory for love. The hidden depth. Perhaps the most important lesson from this story is that people are deeper than they seem. We all have hidden layers. We all have things about ourselves that the world doesn't see. We all have values and principles that don't show up in our public image. Dean Martin was famous for being funny and charming. But he was also a father. He was also a man of principle. He was also someone who understood what mattered. That's a reminder to all of us. The quiet, serious moments in our lives, the moments when we make hard choices and sacrifice things, those moments define who we really are. Not the moments when the world is watching. Not the moments when we're on stage or in the spotlight. The moments that define us are the moments when nobody is watching. The moments when we have to choose between what we want and what the people we love need. The eternal truth, the story of Dean Martin turning down JFK's inauguration, has lived for more than 60 years now. It has survived the decades. It has survived changes in culture and technology and society. It has survived because it touches on something eternal. It touches on something that all human beings understand on a deep level. It touches on love. It touches on sacrifice. It touches on the beauty of a father choosing his son. In a world that is constantly pushing us toward achievement and ambition and bigger goals, this story reminds us that sometimes the greatest achievement is simply being there. Sometimes the biggest goal is simply loving someone enough to sacrifice for them. That's what Dean Martin did. And that's why this story matters. That's why it will continue to matter for generations to come. The ripple effect, how one decision changed everything. The domino effect of character. What's fascinating about Dean Martin's decision is that it had ripples. It affected people far beyond just his son. It affected how people thought about leadership, about masculinity, about what it means to be a successful person. When other entertainers heard about Dean Martin's choice, some of them started making similar choices. Some of them started saying no to opportunities to be with their families. Some of them started putting their relationships first. When politicians saw Dean Martin's example, some of them started thinking about their own families. President Kennedy himself, despite his own personal struggles, had deeply valued his relationship with his children. Seeing someone like Dean Martin, someone at the height of fame, choose family over the biggest professional opportunity stirred something in people. The quiet revolution. Dean Martin's decision was quiet. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a manifesto. It was just a man saying no to something because he loved someone. But that quiet choice became a revolution. It became a revolution in how people thought about success. It became a revolution in how fathers thought about their responsibilities. It became a revolution in how society thought about what it meant to be a good man. The revolution wasn't loud. It didn't have banners or protests. But it was real. It was powerful. And it came from one man's quiet decision to put his family first. The legacy lives on. Today, more than 60 years later, this story is still told. It's told to young fathers who are struggling with work-life balance. It's told to ambitious people who are trying to figure out their priorities. It's told to anyone who is facing the choice between their career and their relationships. And every time the story is told, it does what it did when Dean Martin made the decision. It reminds us what matters. It reminds us that we don't have to choose between being successful and being a good parent, a good friend, a good person. But sometimes when we're really tested, we have to show where our true priorities are. Dean Martin showed where his true priorities were. And that's why this story will never die. Fire the modern relevance. In our time in 2025, we live in a world where nobody ever really says no. Everyone is always on. Everyone is always available. Everyone is always trying to climb higher, achieve more, reach further. The story of Dean Martin turning down the president's inauguration is more relevant now than ever. It's a reminder that it's okay to say no. It's a reminder that your family needs you. It's a reminder that the best opportunities aren't always the biggest opportunities. Sometimes the best opportunity is the chance to be there for someone you love. Sometimes the biggest achievement is putting your phone down and spending time with your family. Sometimes the greatest success is simply being present. A challenge to you. This story challenges us to think about our own choices. It challenges us to ask ourselves, are we making the choices that will matter in the end? Are we putting our families first? Are we willing to sacrifice for the people we love? Dean Martin did. And that choice, made quietly in December 1960, echoes through 60 years of history and continues to inspire people today. That's the power of one man's decision. That's the power of choosing love over ambition. That's the power of being a real person with real values. Television call to action. If this story moved you, if it reminded you about what really matters in life, if it inspired you to think about your own priorities and your own family, then smash that like button right now and don't just like it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. There are more incredible true stories coming. Stories about real people who made real choices that changed how we think about life, love, and what it means to be human. Asterisk asterisk. In the comments section below, tell us, have you ever turned down a big opportunity to be there for someone you love? Have you ever made a sacrifice like Dean Martin did? Share your story with us. Because the world needs to hear about real people making real choices that matter. Your story might inspire someone who is facing a similar choice right now. Your story might remind someone that they're not alone. Your story might change someone's life. That's the power of sharing. That's the power of being honest about what we've sacrificed and why we've done it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for understanding the deeper meaning of Dean Martin's choice. And thank you for being part of this community of people who believe that family matters, that love matters, and that sometimes the biggest achievement is simply being there. Asterisk asterisk. See you in our next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Asterisk asterisk.